video, but the next question that they were talking about after the stuff about Castro, which was just ridiculous on its face, was the Iraq War. And it went to Joe Biden, basically saying, Biden, you supported the Iraq War. Why'd you do that? He was like, well, I believe George W. Bush. I thought he was telling the truth. I thought the vote for that meant that we weren't going to use force in Iraq. And again, from my perspective, anybody who supported the Iraq War, that's a automatic disqualifier. That was as Noam Chomsky points out, the most disastrous foreign policy decision of the 21st century. Joe Biden was a huge supporter of it up until I think 2005 or 2006 even. So next, you're out. And then Bernie, said, everybody knew that George W. Bush and his administration were lying. You still supported it. We knew what what giving him the war powers meant. It meant that we were going to go to war with Iraq. And then Bernie again brought up how Biden supported these horrible trade agreements that outsourced millions of jobs, a lot of them good paying, things like NAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China, DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, the Hyde Amendment, and just pointing out how we need the courage to take on these powerful interests. Bernie Sanders has always had that ability, that courage to take a stand when it matters, to be on the right side of history. Joe Biden's always been on the wrong side of that equation. Then Biden, I wrote, Biden was saying he didn't support the things that he clearly did because he was trying to I didn't support NAFTA, I didn't support PNTR. No, you voted for those. You also voted for the Defense of Marriage Act, which obviously, discriminated against, same-sex couples, didn't allow them to get married. He was in support of that. And then Bernie was just, again, Biden was trying to say, Bernie, you're supporter of all these authoritarian regimes throughout the world. What do you got to say about that? And Bernie was like, no, I've always called out authoritarianism, authoritarian regimes throughout the world, whether it be in China, Russia, wherever, which I think he harps on China and Russia a little bit too much because, let's face it, the U.S. is pretty authoritarian in a lot of ways. And he just talked about how, Bernie was able to work with conservative members in the Senate to pass the War Powers Resolution to stop the funding of Saudi Arabia in their genocide that they're perpetuating against the people in Yemen. Obviously, hugely problematic and destructive on so many levels. And then the last question before the closing was, the first was to Joe Biden. Why is Bernie so much better with regards to the Hispanic voters? And Joe Biden completely just disregarded the questions. Like, well, no, I actually have strong support all around. I'm winning. I'm a Democrat with a capital D. All minorities support me. I'm winning by a big margin. So just, again, a total non-answer there by Sleepy Joe Biden. And then the question was to Bernie. Seems like for the second, presidential election cycle in a row, your support among the African American community isn't, maybe what it should be or what you would like it to be. What are you going to do about that? He talked about, defeating Trump's really important. He has a grassroots, multi-generational, multiracial campaign, and how Bernie and his movement is winning the ideological battle with regards to things like Medicare for All, where out of the first 20 states that have voted, majority of people in those states have supported Medicare for All. Bernie is obviously a huge proponent of that. Joe Biden doesn't support that, as well as how Bernie is winning with voters under 50 and especially just dominating with voters under 30. And then this is the first time in the debate that Bernie made the electability case, and he was basically saying, I have some questions about how Joe Biden would be able to defeat Donald Trump in a general election if he doesn't have the support of young people as well as of the Latino community, which was a great response in my opinion. And then the one of the moderators, I forget which one, asked this closing question, just closing thoughts on the coronavirus situation, the coronavirus pandemic. Bernie said, my hearts go out to everybody, to all the families and communities who have been affected by this. We got to move more aggressively. We got to address the issues in healthcare, making sure people have the access to healthcare that they need. It needs to be free. We need to make sure the test kits are available. We need to make sure there's enough ICUs for people affected by this if they need it. And then he finished off by talking about the economic uncertainty that this is causing, as well as just in general the total or the wealth and the extreme income and wealth inequality that we have in the United States, and how a very, very select few people control so much wealth and resources, and then political power as a result. And while the rest of us, the working class, are left just fighting for the crumbs. So he brought it back to issues of power and equity, and how we really need to change around our political system so it actually benefits the majority and not the tiny billionaire owner class at the top. So just bringing it back to these structural issues that are inherent within the United States presently. So that was pretty good. Biden just talked about how people are going through a lot. There's fear and concern. We need to have all hands on deck, both with regards to the United States and the world. We need to listen to science. We need to keep people in their homes. So those are just kind of some of the things that both candidates talked about, and the different issues that were addressed. And so just wanted to kind of give overall impressions. Both candidates. First, I think Joe Biden actually had a pretty decent debate performance, and obviously as a Bernie supporter, I was hoping Biden wouldn't have done as well as he did. He didn't have as many gaffes, or didn't really seem like any moments where he just completely lost his train of thought. He didn't wander off stage. He didn't forget what state he was in. He didn't say he was running for the Senate. He didn't say vote for the other Biden. That stuff. And I mean, he had a few tiny gaffes. He started to talk about H1N1 instead of the coronavirus, and then at one point he almost said he supported Medicare for all, then quickly caught that slip. So overall, Joe Biden did pretty decent, honestly, all things considered, especially considering he went into today as the front runner. A lot of the momentum was already on his side. So I mean, he overall pretty solid performance by Joe Biden. And then let's move on to one Bernard Sanders. I think he had a better debate performance than Joe Biden did. He was clear and consistent throughout. He went after Joe Biden a couple of times on all of his horrible policy and voting record, things like NAFTA, the Iraq War, PNTR, the Hyde Amendment, all of those issues, as well as the fact that Joe Biden's, I think he pointed out how Joe Biden's healthcare plan leaves 10 million people uninsured. If he didn't, then he definitely should have. And I think one really strong point during the debate was that second to last question, where Bernie Sanders was really highlighting the fact that Joe Biden's going to have problems in a general election because he basically has zero youth support, and you're going to need that to defeat Donald Trump. Young people aren't going to come out en masse to vote for Joe Biden, as well as the problems that he has with the Latino vote. Part of that perhaps is, the record number of deportations that happened under the Obama Biden administration. So I really think Bernie would have been wise to really hammer away at the electability issue throughout the debate, not just towards the end of it. I think that's somewhere where he could have improved. I think he should have also highlighted how Joe Biden's healthcare plan costs more money, how Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan would save $450 billion a year, as well as the 70+ thousand lives. He should have been really hammering away on his healthcare plan saves money. Joe Biden's healthcare plan is going to keep taking more money out of your pocket. And really, again, I think Bernie needed to hammer away at the electability issue a lot more. I didn't hear Bernie say that he thought Joe Biden could defeat Donald Trump. I think that was definitely wise. And then another issue, I think Bernie should have highlighted it with how Kyle Kalinske and others have commented that Bernie needs to make the point that he is the centrist, he's the moderate, he's the one who has these policy positions and platforms that a majority of Americans support, like Medicare for All, which Bernie pointed out, like free college, like canceling student loan debt, like a living wage, like ending the wars, like legalizing marijuana, like having a wealth tax. All of these things, majority of people support. I, Bernie Sanders, support those with the majority of Americans. Joe Biden's the radical. He's the extremist. His healthcare plan leaves 10 million people underinsured. It's going to cost you more money. People are still going to die. Joe Biden's the radical. He's the extremist. Really laying it out in these really, simple terms, I think would have been wise for Bernie. So those are some ways I think, Bernie Sanders could have perhaps had a stronger debate performance. But overall, I think Bernie won. Again, he really highlighted Joe Biden's horrible policy record, and his lackluster climate change proposals, how those aren't up to snuff for the just huge existential crisis that climate change poses. But here, so just a quick, he should have hit Biden throughout on the electability issue. He should have been making the point that he's the electable, or he's the moderate, he's the centrist, and that Joe Biden's the radical, he's the extremist, and really just hammering away on the healthcare issue of how Joe Biden's plan costs more money, it's going to cost lives, people will still be going bankrupt. And Bernie Sanders actually did a really good job of highlighting how Joe Biden wanted to cut Social Security, Medicare, all these other really important government programs multiple times, and told people to go look it up on YouTube. So those are just some of my critiques and some of the things that I thought Bernie did well, as well as just my overall impression of Joe Biden. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this debate. Who do you think did better out of the two candidates? And if you think it was Bernie, was it enough to shift some of the momentum for these states that are voting on Tuesday? And again, I think it would have been wise for Bernie to go out there and say, and I actually think these elections should be postponed, they need to be suspended. We're telling people to self-isolate and quarantine themselves, and yet, we're telling people to go out and vote on Tuesday. You can't have it both ways. They should have been suspended, until this coronavirus pandemic gets under control. So that's, again, something I think Bernie should have pointed out. So please share your comments in the comment sections down below. Peace.